Hello everybody and welcome to our webinar about the use of multi-factor authentication devices for Microsoft environments. We've seen a lot of interest in the topic and we are very happy to help you here. Myself, I am Jens Nielsen from Liga. I'm the CEO of Liga and I am companioned by the Group Managing Director, Bjarke Alling, who is going to present some of the more technical details of the solutions that we are looking around today.
Yeah, and welcome everyone. It's quite exciting to see this huge interest into the subject. I know that from the participant list that there are people from multiple countries. I think I counted 4 or 5 countries across the Northern Europe. And we believe that this area is of huge importance to secure your infrastructure and to use also what you will see today in this presentation. You will see that what we argue for is simply using what you already have at hand. There's a lot of technology available already that can be used to benefit your security. So also I'm very happy to welcome you. And yeah, I will leave the first part of this presentation here to Jens. And then I will jump in and give you more detail into some of the arguments for the various authentication factors. So Jens, please take it away.
For practical reasons, we would like to ask you to put any questions you might have in the chat. We will do a Q&A at the end of the presentation and go over all the questions if time allows for it, or else we will make sure to follow up with each of you individually afterwards. So let's jump into just a little background on who we are, Liga. Liga is founded in 1999 and we have been through several iterations of the company. I know some of the participants in the webinar knows us from our trading business, where we have been working with infrastructure components for many years. We are active throughout the Nordics and also to some extent in the rest of Europe with more than 500 customers. We located today in our studio in Copenhagen, which is also where we have our main office, as well as we have an office in Stockholm. And we do a revenue of approximately 5.5 million euros per year. So some of the technologies that we are working with that are relevant for the multi-factor authentication is technologies from Micro Focus, of which we are a platinum technology partner. And this basically means that we, for some of the solutions that we develop, also include OEM components developed from Micro Focus. Those of you that have been with the IT industry for many years may know some of the components that originated in the former Novell environment. We are also working together with some of the other vendors that you can see on the slide here. Cryptovision on the cryptographic part of things, SUSE on the OS, TARDIS, Crypto, Signicat and IDVation are other partners that we are doing stuff with. But let's jump into today's topic. The reason why that we decided to set up this webinar is because we are looking into a situation where cybersecurity breaches seem to originate mainly from a single point, which is the compromisation of user accounts. And this basically leads down to the issue that somebody is able to grab the credentials of a user account to get further into the network. And if you look at this link in the slides, I may mention also you will receive the slides after the presentations. You can estimate that maybe more than 99.9% of cyber breaches, compromises and attacks can be traced back to compromised user accounts. So what you really want to do is to make sure that the user account is as protected as possible, so that phishing attacks or vulnerabilities around exposed services cannot be utilized by the bad guys. The multi-factor authentication itself is for many organizations a compliance-regulated mandatory requirement. And for everybody who has IT in their business, and who would not have that. This is actually something that you must have if you're serious about your IT security. So all the recommendations that are coming out from the various standardization bodies that are coming out of Microsoft, that are coming out of Gartner, everybody involved in cybersecurity issues are pointing towards multi-factor as a mandatory requirement if you're really serious about your security. Now, multi-factor can be many things, and there's a lot of fog around this topic, and we will dive into some of the various options that multi-factor seem to be, and come up with our suggestion of the best solution available. But before jumping into that, it would be interesting to see how many of you participants that are actively using multi-factor in your Windows environment today in your company. So for that purpose, we have prepared just a small poll. So Bjarke, maybe you can see what the results are?
Yes, I can see that. It says that no, we're not. 67% are not using multi-factor for Windows login, and 33%, so two-thirds.
Two-thirds of all
this,
participants
this
today.
Very small now. It's actually of this just this audience of who that's actually answer it have not protected your default Windows your default environment, and I think this exactly leads to continue on you know what is multi-factor, what is actually not.
Absolutely. So there seems to be at least some room for upping on the security side of things for the Windows login, if we can rely on what the professionals that are participating today are showing in our poll. So the multi-factor is not just a multi-factor, as I said, and this is where Bjarke will take over and go through some of the options available.
Yeah, and I think it's very interesting just to see, and welcome to you again. It's very interesting to see that we have nearly two-thirds, maybe 70% of this group of people listening in today saying, and I expect most of you are IT professionals. So given the case that we know from everyone, you know, all the advisors, all the standardization bodies, the governmental advice, everyone in the industry. I've also been part, as some of you might know, National Security Council in Denmark, participating in conferences across Europe. You know, we're talking about this all the time. I think we're coming to a point now where it's all a matter of, you know, simply start doing it, practicing it, making it happen. And I think this is where it's interesting to jump into what are multi-factor and how can multi-factor actually be accomplished. Because multi-factor is many things. It's a wide area. Obviously, for many of you, you would see, you know, the mobile phone, the cell phone. That's a secondary factor. That's what you also call a possession device. It's something that I have. And you know, just for repeating, what is multi-factor? Something I know, something I am, or something I have. And typically for multi-factor, you need to have two out of two in these three categories. So something I know, it can be a password, that can be a PIN. Something I have, typically either a phone or a smart card or similar, or something I am, which leans into the biometric question. I think exactly we come to something I have, in this case here, a USB token. I think some of you are familiar with these various kinds of tokens. They exist, different vendors in the industry. The USB token here, compared to the phone, is a small unit that can be connected directly to your PC. In some cases, you need what they call presence awareness. You need to push a button just to tell that there's a human being connected to it. The thing with these USB devices is that it runs a cryptographic process. I will also delve into some of this in a later point in this session. But the USB device can be practical because it does not. We'll also get to know some of the benefits, some of the pros and the cons on these specific USB devices. As I said, biometric, fingerprint, facial recognition, iris for your eyes, voice, are also some of the factors that are in many cases primarily used for our individual use. I think a lot of us are using with our iPhones, using the facial recognition, others are using fingerprint recognition. Those are convenient in terms of when you are an individual user, but they have some drawbacks when it comes to larger scale implementation. Then, of course, we have this kind of the old tractor, the old-fashioned number generator, one-time password generator. It has some huge, so to say, drawbacks. It is a man in the middle and other things, but it also, at the end of the day, can be fairly practical, fairly simple, and mainly can be quite user-friendly in some cases. So, I will not rule that out yet. But it's still on the palette. And finally, also what you will see throughout this session today is that we talk about the smart card, the chip card, and the advantages that this will bring to the table. So just showing here on this very short slide, you see all these different kinds of authentication methods and systems. And I think that's something that makes the decision moving forward for a lot of people, especially when we are in conversations with organizations, also a lot of confusions. What should we choose? What are the best? I'm not familiar. I choose that. And I think it at the end of the day also comes to the matter of simply trying things out. And maybe some cases are one solution good, and other cases other solutions are good. So let's just have a look to what to consider when we're discussing multifactor. Obviously, for multifactor, we have a technical matters. So security, what kind of level of security, the risk assessment, these areas, do I need a high level of security in cryptographic process that I can 100% rely on, or can I accept some lower degree of security but still gain large advancements on the matter of eliminating passwords or just securing accounts. Then, of course, the implementation. Is this something that can be done easily, or it's a complex process? Do I need to make adjustments to the client systems? How do I hand it out? How do I do the enrollment? And finally, also, I think it's a huge matter for many, the cloud strategy. Is this something that can also be transferred and using in cloud? Is this a cloud service for multifactor? And does that also connect back to my own network and to my on-prem environment? I think also matters that comes to the question. Secondly, user experience. I think for everyone we know that it's kind of, every IT professional fears the user, because we always know that inside any organization of any size, there's always some areas of, prima donnas, there are always someone that's kind of states, okay, if this is not working for me, you can just forget it. So user experience is hugely important when we talk about the different multi-factor authentication methods. We are not in a position where we can just force through how to do this. And another thing, which actually just a few days ago came to my mind in a conversation with a large insurance company, is speed. Because they're concerned on that they lose productivity, because it takes maybe a minute or 2 minutes, and if you have to do this many times during the day, then you are afraid that you might lose half an hour in productivity for one single employee. And then, of course, if you multiply that with 5,000, then it suddenly becomes to real money. So speed when you authenticate to your system is something that you definitely should consider. Then, of course, in the last kind of section of these matters to consider, the cost. Cost is always a matter and always important to consider. So pricing, obviously, what is the overall price, but what is also the price of the tokens, or the use case device that I like to use. Durability, is this something that easily breaks? Do I have to replace it? Stuff like that. Is it kind of, how does it actually cope with the environment in which it has to work? I am working in a factory environment, maybe where I have, heat and other things. Will it survive in these environments, or are there other things that you have to put into consideration? And then, of course, the human resource. I think I mentioned that already, also with regards to the speed. That when you do. It can come up with kind of quite human resource intensive to use a given method. So there's a lot of things to put into the consideration. We will come into some of these matters now here in the next slides. The first thing when you come to security, you see here on your left side there's a large diagram. As Jens just said, you will receive the slide deck, so you can delve into this. Also, the link that is mentioned. This link comes from a Danish report from a DK CERT, the CERT body for the universities and research networks that put up this list. And I think at the end of the day, it also comes from a US report showing all these various kinds of authentication methods and also their resistance to different threats. So let's have a look. So just a few kind of points here. Phone-based methods and OTP methods are vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attacks. And I think you are all familiar with man-in-the-middle. If you're not, I will definitely recommend you going reading on this matter, because it can be a serious security issue. But the thing here is that using classic OTP services, you will end up in a risk where someone can step in the communication and steal that number, and therefore they can conduct the authentication on behalf of the user, which is definitely not what we want to see happening. As some of the discussions, as an example on SMS text, that this is happening there. And trust me, the criminals are very good at stealing this information and very good at doing these exercises, getting these tokens. So we have smart card is the only nameless, passwordless, and tamper-proof multi-factor authentication method. That's actually interesting because when we're talking about multi-factor authentication, we have, as I just mentioned, you can have username, password plus something extra, something I know and something I have. But what about if you could go say, I don't have a username? That's nameless. I don't have a password. Obviously, that's passwordless. How can I then authenticate? That's what the smart card technology provides. So it simply changes the way that the authentication is conducted from something that is normally typed in and turned into a hash value, then transmitted via the wire and then compared and then coming back into a cryptographic process that is asymmetric, where you can rely on a simple outcome. Either you will get a true or false, which is far more secure in terms of reliance on the security. Also, looking at a smart card with a PIN is the most secure MFA solution on the market. This is not something we have invented. This is not something that I say. I would just, at the end of the day, just pick up the technology that is already out there. It's been out there for years, for decades actually. The good news is that it's also very highly available in a classic Microsoft domain environment, and that's exactly what I will come to. So looking at what we believe in terms of implementation, when we see this small animation. So we will, in this presentation now, focus into the PKI device certificate with a device password or with a token password. A token password is a PIN. Typically a PIN, we all know that from our credit cards, but the PIN is a simplified string, typically 4 or 6 digits. The magic with the PIN is that you only have 3 or 5 attempts, and then it will literally block the card from being used. This is happening in the device. This is not happening in the backend. So it provides a high degree of security that we can use. And the good news with the smart cards are that they are by default supported with Windows Server. It's supported with Windows 10. It's also supported with Windows 11. So it's a built-in functionality of the Microsoft Windows environment. You actually have to do, not that much to make it run. It also supports a local domain, so you have whatever domain you have. It will support Azure Active Directory. It's a new feature coming up, just announced this spring. And also it will support, and is by default supported in ADFS. It's also supported in the terms if you are using a remote desktop gateway for accessing remote RDP sessions. It's simply a menu in the configuration. Remove the allowance for username password and only tick the allowance for smart cards, and then you have two-factor authentication immediately for your remote desktop gateway sessions. And the users will not need to use VPN or other functionalities. Of course, you can go with ADFS for federation, and there will be even further options coming in the future. What is also important is that we do not need modifications to the Windows operating system. So we don't need to install additional software. Actually, all the software is already there. You need to do some stuff in the backend, but that's it. So on the client side, the user will obtain a card, a smart card, a chip in different form factors. There's a video also on our website, on liga.com/video. You will find a video describing all the different kind of form factors and other ways that smart card can be delivered. And obviously for the software maintenance, it's minimal because this is all covered already by your Windows Update service. So there are practical, very, very limited numbers of tasks to be done, and you will get a security measure that is on the best available in the market. So yes, it supports on-prem, hybrid, and cloud. It can be done in many, many ways. Just one thing that now Jens also mentioned stuff that we work with. We have an environment, and we will welcome you to demonstrate this. Also, we have a demonstration environment in which I can run an online demo. You can see how it works. You can ask all the questions you want to have. It's not a problem. Just go to the website, to liga.com, and book a demo, and we can show it how it actually works. So, looking at phone, quite often used with multi-factor methods. Familiar to users, it's as you see on the positive side, familiar to users. Bring your own device is also a matter, and users normally don't forget their phone. On the other side, the consequences on using multi-factor for phone, it requires modifications to Windows login. It still requires a username password. Everyone needs a company phone. That's an interesting question. Will you trust bring your own device? It all depends on your organization, the kind of users. Is this something I can trust? And especially also, it's not necessarily suitable for all environments. Typically, a phone will require that you have online access. So if you are in a different environments for offline, it can be difficult. It also phones can be difficult if you have gloves or other matters. There can be many cases where phones are not necessarily the best possible option. Also time, you have to swipe something on a phone, do something extra, back and forth. It can be time consuming. The FIDO key, the U2F key, as mentioned also, it's easy to use. Many people see this as a cool design. It provides one very important thing, is its phishing resistance. Looking a little bit at the consequences, it requires modifications to Windows login. So if I want to use a FIDO key for my Windows experience, for my default Windows login, I would need to do additional stuff to my client simply to make this run, because Windows does not by default support this authentication method. I'm aware that we have Windows Hilo and there are options there, but those are personal. This is not an environment in large scale where you have thousands of users, where people are shifting devices, etc. It still will require username password, and obviously I'm also aware that FIDO 2 is coming out, and that might change a little bit on the matter, but it's still somewhere in between. Also with FIDO, you need an enrollment per this given IDP. So FIDO is at the end of the day, what FIDO stands for is fast identity online. At the end of the day, it's a technology developed for consumers accessing different online services. So it's very good when you have a Google account or maybe a Facebook account and a different account where you want to have different login to these different systems, but you don't want to share your information between these systems. But it's more complex when it comes to a company environment. For the mobile area, it's a complex user experience. It's kind of tricky to make it work, and it needs some exercise and some experience. And finally, it's pricey, so it's something also worth considering. Then the smart card comes in. So what are the pros on a smart card? Well, it's fast and easy to use. You don't need the username and password. It's phishing resistant. It's actually the most secure method that we are aware of. And it can also be used as an ID card because, well, you can't with a FIDO key, but on a smart card you can print name and picture and other information. And it works brilliantly offline in many environments. Also, the use of an ID card, of course, that can be combined with door systems, cantina payments, that kind of stuff, follow me printing. The cons, well, you need a card reader. There's this lost card, what do I do if I don't have a card? If I get my PIN, and finally also I need a CA backend. So there's some work to be done, and there are also obviously some cons. I think we can circumvent the cons, thinking about how this can be done. So looking at the total cost of ownership, a little bit here. So cost of hardware, cost of software, cost of implementation, cost of maintenance. Those are the matters that you should put into your equation. And looking at a phone, it all depends on the phone, obviously. It can be fairly pricey. Looking at a typically FIDO key, it can be, I would say also to some extent pricey. The number generator is quite cheap. Honestly, it can be a nice secondary alternative and or fallback option in many cases. And finally, the smart card itself can be very cheap compared to other of these technologies. And the thing with the card reader, because that's a very common question that I receive, is that the card reader is actually built into the PC. And I think if you are aware of that and make sure when you order laptops, you will get the card reader as a built-in option, and therefore the card reader will not become a cost into this neither. So I think that's why we recommend smart card, and I will ask Jens to kind of move on and give that explanation.
Absolutely. So thank you, Bjarke. Some of the things that Bjarke mentioned around the smart card here actually leads back to the initial boxes that we presented. It's on the technical side of things, the unrivaled security that the smart cards provide, because they are based on very secure cryptomatic algorithms that are being used every single time the user authenticates. But this cannot be beaten. The implementation is simple. If you have a Windows domain environment, it's very easy to get your CA up and running, and then you just need to issue the smart cards. And as we might mention at the end of the presentation, Liga is specializing in software around this topic. And finally, for your cloud strategy, it's already now official by Microsoft that they are going to support the smart card, not only, as you know it traditionally, locally, but also for the Azure Active Directory. If you look at the user experience, the convenience on the smart cards is something that we sometimes see in conversation with customers, that they are reluctant to look at. They look at the smart card and say, do I have to type in the PIN code? And the answer here is yes. But once that people actually have tried the process, that they no longer need to enter their username, to enter their password and enter something else from a third device, but they just slide in the smart card, they enter their PIN code, and then they're logged in, is actually an unrivaled user experience. Our feedback is that once people have tried it, they don't want to go back. It's a little bit like those of you who are so fortunate to have an automatic gear in your car. Once you've been there, you don't want to go back. If you look at the speed is definitely an option, as Bjarke also mentioned. Again, doing multiple steps to authenticate throughout the day is likely to have a big impact on productivity, because you are not only authenticating when you get to work in the morning, you are usually authenticating several times throughout the day. If you go this little extra step and introduce a local identity provider that are tied to your Windows domain, this could be the Microsoft ADFS or the Micro Focus Access Manager or something similar. Now that session, authenticated Windows session that you're running would actually be enough for you to access all the services that your IDP, your identity provider, can give you access to. So there's a lot of speed enhancement to get from this smart card implementation. And maybe I should also mention here, for those who are working in the field of public sector and government under the EU regulation that is known as eIDAS, or in Denmark we have the ENSIS implementation, the smart card actually lives up to the highest level of security. And then finally, as you saw, significantly cheaper. You can do a self-service rollout, which means there are no involvement of HR or other staff. If you just give people a blank card, they will be able to do the issuing process themselves. They will also be able to lock the card and issue a new one without involving the help desk. Everything from a self-service perspective. What Liga is doing is actually falling into two parts. We have this little product called Liga Local ID, which is meant for smaller environments. It's a single user product for AD environments that can actually automate the process of issuing a smart card. It also works with Azure AD and AD Connect and ADFS, stuff like that. But this is an easy way to get started to sort of tip into the world of using PKI and smart cards in the Windows environment. After the presentation today, we will send you an email with a code that actually allows you to get a 3-year license for our product for the cost of 1 year. So look into that. What we are doing in the more complex environments and the enterprise environments is our flagship product called Global ID that actually automates a lot more around the issuing, around the user lifecycle handling and the integration with identity management into third-party systems as well. So local ID for the smaller areas and global ID for the larger environments. So that was what we had to say about the multifactor for Windows right now. Let's dig into some of the questions, and I will see if I can find them here in the chat. And Bjarke, maybe you can answer that. We have a question here that says, how does it work with a smart card when you're using the Windows login on non-Windows clients? That could be a smartphone, a tablet, or a Mac.
For the last part, the Mac, it's also a well-established process. So Apple for Mac OS has long-term supported that you can use smart cards. Obviously, you need a card reader. You need to communicate with the machine. There exist a lot of card readers, as I said, also in my part here in the session, that can either be Bluetooth readers or connected readers or USB. You can even get keyboards that do all these things. But also one thing I just want to mention here is that we are working now and we'll deliver this throughout the summer, a solution that will allow everyone to use a physical smart card as I have here. I think if I bring it to the laptop here, you see this card, and the card here can simply be just tapped to the back of my phone, and I will get a push notification to the phone. I will use the NFC in the phone, and I will authenticate to the card, and I will send back the communication to the back end, and by that I can authenticate. So actually one of the big, I would say, objections to smart card is the lack of support for mobile devices, and I think with the mobile ID that we're developing, it will become a part that this problem will be solved, or this objection will be solved. And I can even add that the mobile ID will become an open source part, because we're doing this in combination and in cooperation with the Cyber Hub in Denmark, and also funded on some public funding or some semi-public funding, where we get the option simply to deliver this in a more broader perspective, because we believe it's highly important that we have this unified experience across all the platforms. So we will of course make some additional add-ons to the product, make sure it's integrated into our backend, but at the end of the day you will be able to pick it up and use it for your own purposes in your own ways. So stay tuned for that also, and keep maybe sign up for our email and our mailing list. You will be notified on the progress on the mobile ID area.
Thank you, Børge. Now we have another question. The user here says, it sounds like the smart cards are the safest option for multi-factor authentication, but I've heard they can be cloned. Is that true?
I think it's an old rumor. Maybe in some early days of smart cards that was done. But I think if you think about where chips are used today, we don't see any cloning. It is actually not possible. Because it was possible, we would see some very highly problematic issues on our credit card or on our passport. So inside your passport today, there's a chip which are at the end of the day identical to the chip we're using in these cards. The only difference are the different capabilities of the software installed in the chip. But they are using the same methodology. And since we haven't heard any cases of cloned passports for the chip or cloned credit cards, I think we can rely on that this technology is as secure as it gets at current time.
So we have another question here. The user asks, if we already have a door access card, do we need another card?
Absolutely not. These cards here are multiple configurable, so they can actually have multi-functions. So you can use it for your PC login, but you can also use the card in typically environment where you have MFA door systems, or you have Desfire. You can maintain the card in different ways. So look at a card like a Lego brick setup, where you can add in multiple functionality. You can have antennas, you can have different chips. These are kind of, built on order, where you design, say, okay, I want to have this kind of functionality in this card. And so the card body and the chip and the antennas and this technology are simply ordered to build in this case. So that should not be the case if that's the route you want to take.
Okay. Another question here, what do you actually do if a user loses her card, or if it is stolen?
I think those are two different, well, at the end of the day, they're the same case. If you lose your card, if you lose the possession of your private key, then you would need to get a new certificate. So the process is that you would, depending on your setup, you would have to speak to the one that is responsible for your certificate authority, and your IT staff, announce, okay, I lost my card, please block my access with the card. No difference from if you lose your credit card, you will call the bank hotline and they will block your card. So that's exactly the same. And this comes also to the question, should I have a fallback option? Because of course then in that situation, if your card is blocked, then you can't work. So what do I then do? And that's exactly where we work now in different areas of eID, where you're using the Danish MitID, the bank ID, the Personalausweis in Germany, other eID options. So it could be a fallback option, at least until the user can get a new card. In many cases, these cards are so cheap that you can distribute. If you have remote people working on remote offices, or even working mainly from home, they can get a spare card. And as I just said, the mobile phone now is turned into a card reader. And when you have a card reader, we are also able to create a new card via the phone. So that's exactly something that we have in the pipeline, is simply saying, okay, you grab your spare card, you run through a new re-authentication process, you will be allowed to use your phone to create a new card. So there are, the old days where you had a very complex recovery process. I think that is gone. It should not be. It should not be done that way today. It's simply not needed. We can do that more cleverly.
That's exciting times indeed to use your mobile phone as a card reader.
Yeah.
Indeed. Basically. Actually, the questions come rolling in. It's a pleasure. Thank you, guys. There is a question here that says, in our organization, we're using shared workstations for our employees, and it's difficult to find a solution for multifactor that will work in such an environment. What would you recommend?
Oh, that's a very common thing. We've seen that now a few times, that you have this, it can be inventories in manufacturing cases, it can be retail stores, it can be hotel reception, where you have this environment where many users going back and from. The good news is that Microsoft some years ago introduced what they call fast desktop switching, which means that when a user approaches the PC, they can change the desktop. I think every one of you that are old enough would remember that one Windows 98 or Windows, some of the early versions of Windows could only have one user session. With fast desktop switching, you can run multiple sessions on the same Windows computer. In the way it works with username password, you still need to go and click on the left screen and choose the other user and then log into that as the user that you are, and back and forth. It's a little bit complicated. If you're using smart cards and you configure the desktop client not to allow password access, then the Windows machine automatically recognizes the card, put the login screen in the right login form, and you just enter your PIN code and you will log on. Actually, the PC here right in front of me is exactly configured for that purpose. So if you want to see that live, we can do that in a one-to-one session. So it's actually built into Windows today.
Very good. So. And I think the last question on the list here, the user says, can we start with smart cards on a Windows client and later add mobile smart cards when ready, like a sort of conditional smart card that depends on the device?
Yes, absolutely. My recommendation today to any organization, maybe start with the IT department. That's actually what we do a few municipalities right now in the Danish sector, where they simply say, okay, how can we do some simplified privilege access? How can we do access to Windows servers on a secure manner? And so kind of build it from that point. The mobile phone and the mobile ID will be very easy to onboard when you see that. There will also be other back-end requirements to run the mobile ID service. So if the user has a card and can authenticate to their Windows machine, the onboarding to the mobile phone will become extremely easy, because we already have all the information we need for the user on the card. So fire up your app, authenticate your card, and then the app will automatically register itself, and you will be able also to use your phone as a authentication device. Maybe when you are on, offline, or you're working different places, all depending on you. So in many cases, depending on if you are in educational sector, as an example, it's a quite common case. Even in cases where you might have working on a Mac OS, maybe not non-domain machine. So as long as you have an access to the back end of your let's say your educational institution, a university. You can get the card and you use the card for door access, but then you need to authenticate to some services, typically web-based services, with your university. And therefore you can use the card in that case. So whatever way, I would recommend get the card in the hands of the user and then start utilizing that in as many ways as possible.
Okay.
Did that answer the questions?
Well, I think we got to the end of the list, but feel free to get in touch with us if you come up with some other questions that we haven't covered yet. With this, I would like to thank you all for attending today. Feel free to reach out for us. You will see in the slide deck there's our email addresses, LinkedIn, and also links to our webpage liga.com. Knowledge is where we have articles, backgrounds, informatics, everything related to the solutions that we are working with. And I believe Bjarke also mentioned that we have a ton of very informative videos available on Vimeo that actually shows in very detail how you work with these technologies in real life. So, with that, I would like to thank everybody for participating, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you, and goodbye.